It happened on a warm Saturday evening, the kind that used to make me feel alive. The backyard was strung with fairy lights, and the smell of barbecue lingered in the air. Dozens of teenagers and their parents gathered for Madeline's high school graduation party, her big send-off before college. I had spent all week helping Olivia, my daughter, plan it. I brought handmade decorations, baked Madeline's favorite lemon cake from scratch, and even arranged the centerpieces with her school colors. I stood near the drinks table sipping lemonade, my back a little sore. From hours of prepping earlier that day, I was smiling, watching Madeline from a distance. She looked beautiful, tall, confident, wrapped in youth and laughter. I remember thinking, she's really growing up. I had tears in my eyes, but they were the good kind. Or so I thought she was with her friends, all dressed in crop tops, denim shorts and sneakers with names I couldn't pronounce. They were taking pictures laughing, posing with balloons that read, Class of 2025. I walked over slowly carrying the cake I had just unboxed. Eager to be part of the celebration, I approached with a gentle smile. "Madeline, sweetie." That's when she turned to her friends, giggled, and said loud enough for the whole group and me to hear, "She's too old to be here. That's my grandma." The girls burst into laughter. A few even covered their mouths in mock surprise, like I'd crashed a party I wasn't invited to. I stopped walking. My hands froze around the cake tray. In that one sentence, that careless, thoughtless sentence, she cut something out of me I didn't even know could bleed. I smiled a practiced one. The kind of smile women my age wear when we've been dismissed, insulted, or forgotten, but don't want to make a scene. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. Olivia was across the yard chatting with a neighbor. She hadn't heard it, or if she had, she pretended not to. No one came to my side. No one pulled Madeline aside to say that was uncalled for. I set the cake down on the table near the music speaker. My hands were shaking slightly, but I don't think anyone noticed. I looked around, and for the first time that day, I realized, truly realized, that I was no longer seen as part of the celebration. I was just there, background noise, a burden. Maybe an old woman with graying hair and orthopedic shoes, who didn't belong among the music and youth and wild, bright future. That was the moment something inside me quietly folded in on itself. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't yell or make a dramatic exit. I just turned, walked to my car, and drove home. No one stopped me. Not even my daughter. Not even the child I had diapered, fed, and cradled through chicken pox and heartbreaks. And when I got home alone, silent and still wearing the little brooch Madeline had gifted me in middle school, I poured myself a glass of water, logged into my online bank account, and pulled up the $529 college fund savings plan I had opened when Madeline was just 2 years old. Every birthday, I added to it. Every Christmas bonus went there. Every tax refund, even when I needed a new roof or a medical scan, I put into her future. The balance read 72,481.23. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I clicked withdraw, and I whispered to myself, she may think I'm too old to be there, but she's about to find out just how much being there cost me. Before the party, before the silence, before that smirk on her face, I would have told you my life was full. Not perfect, not glamorous, but full. I raised my daughter Olivia as a single mum after my husband Thomas died when she was only 10. A car accident on a snowy night. Quick, brutal, unforgiving. After that, it was just me. I worked as an elementary school teacher for 37 years. Not a flashy career, but it meant something to me. I believed in showing up and being dependable. And I brought that same commitment home with me. When Olivia got pregnant at 19, I didn't yell. I didn't guilt her. I held her hand, I told her, "We'll figure it out." And we did. I was there at every doctor's appointment. I held Olivia's hair during morning sickness. I was the one pacing outside the delivery room when she gave birth to Madeline. The moment I held Madeline in my arms, all 5 LBS 7 ahs of her something inside me lit up. A second chance, a new chapter. I looked at her, and all I wanted was to protect her future. I opened the college fund account the week after she was born. I still remember the bank teller's name, Janine. She smiled and said, "You're a good grandma." And I tried to be. I never made a big show about what I gave. It wasn't my style. But behind the scenes, I was pouring everything I had into that girl. Every birthday, I'd buy her books, not toys. I wanted her to fall in love with stories the way I had. Every Christmas, I added $500 to her fund. When Olivia couldn't afford daycare, I retired a little earlier than I wanted to and watched Madeline myself. I changed her diapers, taught her to tie her shoes, and made her pancakes every Friday shaped like the first letter of her name. We had rituals, afternoon cocoa after school, watching old movies, making scrapbooks. She used to call me her best friend. She used to fall asleep on my shoulder, even when she was too big to fit comfortably. When she was 9, she wrote in a Mother's Day card, "Grandma, you're like a mom, but with extra hugs." I still have it, still stained with glitter and love, and Olivia. Well, our relationship had its ups and downs. She was grateful, sure, but over the years it turned into something else. She started expecting my help, not appreciating it. When Madeline hit her teenage years, I became just Grandma. They stopped asking me how I was feeling. When I had knee surgery, neither of them came to stay with me. I had to pay for a nurse. Still, I told myself, they're busy. They're building a life. That was what I wanted for them, wasn't it? I let things slide, I made excuses. I told myself the way they pulled away was normal. I tried not to take it personally. When Madeline stopped calling me after school, I told myself not to be needy, not to be dramatic. I was lucky just to be part of their world, and I believed it. When they invited me to her graduation party, I didn't even hesitate. I said yes, I was excited genuinely. I baked her cake from scratch the way she liked it. 3 layers, lemon cream, hand-iced tiny flowers. I wore the pearl earrings she had once complimented, hoping she'd notice. I even ironed my best blouse. I didn't think for 1 second that I didn't belong there, because until that moment in the backyard when she looked at me like I was an outdated piece of furniture someone forgot to move, I really thought I mattered. I thought I still had a place. But now I see it clearly. I gave everything I had. My time, my money, my youth, my love. And in return, I became invisible. Not all at once, piece by piece quietly. And maybe the most painful part, I let it happen, because I thought that's what love looked like. The first sign wasn't loud. It was quiet. The kind of moment that you almost miss unless you're really paying attention. It started about a year before the party. I was sitting in my kitchen on a Thursday evening, sipping chamomile tea, waiting for Madeline to call. We had a tradition every Thursday after school. She'd call and tell me something new. She learned that week, sometimes math, sometimes gossip, sometimes just how much she hated gym class. It had been our little ritual since 5th grade. That week, the phone didn't ring. I waited until 8 Subaru p.m., then finally texted her. "Missed our chat today. Everything okay?" No response. The next morning, Olivia called. She didn't sound concerned, just distracted. "Oh yeah, Madeline's been busy. You know how teenagers are. She'll catch up with you soon." I laughed it off. "Of course," I told myself. Teenagers, she's probably got homework or a new crush or both. Still, that week turned into 2, then 3. The calls didn't resume. One afternoon, I stopped by their house with some homemade apple butter and a book I thought Madeline would love. Something about a girl who rebuilt her life after being rejected by her family. It felt timely, but I didn't say that out loud. Olivia answered the door. She looked surprised. "Oh, you didn't tell me you were coming." "I just wanted to drop this off." I smiled, holding up the jar and the book. She took them but didn't invite me in. Madeline's upstairs with her friends. She's kind of in her own world lately. I looked past her shoulder, hearing laughter, the sound of young voices bouncing off walls. I used to be part of. "Tell her I said hi," I said softly. "Sure." Olivia said she'll love the book, but she never mentioned it again. The next red flag came when I saw a photo on Madeline's social media, one of those group selfies teens take at arm's length. Madeline was in the center making a duck face. The caption read, "We don't do landlines and grandma drama." I paused. My heart skipped in a way I hadn't felt in years. I clicked on the comments, some laughing emojis, some "LOL yes" from her friends. I wasn't tagged, but I felt tagged just the same. I left a simple comment. "Looks like you had fun. Miss you, sweetheart." A few hours later, I went back to see if she'd replied. My comment was gone. Deleted. Maybe it was a mistake, I thought. Maybe she accidentally hit the wrong button. But when I tried to call her later that night, it went straight to voicemail. Still, I tried to stay hopeful. I kept showing up. I sent postcards when I visited the botanical gardens. I mailed her a little necklace I'd found at a craft fair. Just a delicate silver leaf. Something understated, something pretty. I never got a thank you. Not even a text. Then came the school play. Madeline had a small role in the spring production, Olivia told me over the phone, and I immediately bought tickets. I was so excited. I ironed my best cardigan, made her a bouquet of tulips, and showed up early to get a good seat. The auditorium was packed. Parents laughed and waved to their kids from the front row. Madeline walked on stage, said her lines, and walked off without looking into the audience. I clapped until my palms hurt. After the show, I waited near the stage door. Kids poured out in clusters, hugging friends and snapping selfies. Olivia emerged with Madeline a few minutes later. I called out, "Madeline!" She turned, saw me, and then turned back to her friend, pretending not to hear. Olivia looked uncomfortable. "Oh, Mom, she's just overwhelmed right now." "You know how teens are." I nodded, flowers still in hand. Later that night, I left the tulips on their porch. The next morning, I saw the same bouquet, wilted and unopened in their garbage bin, when I stopped by to return a dish I had borrowed. That was when something in me started to shift, just slightly, like a floorboard that creaks beneath your feet. I wasn't just being left out. I was being quietly written out, and for the first time, I wondered if love, even deep, unconditional love, could survive being taken for granted too long. It's strange how you don't always notice when you're being erased. Not at first. It doesn't happen with a scream or a door slammed in your face. It happens in whispers, glances, and forgotten birthdays. It happens while you're still folding their laundry, still showing up with soup when they're sick, still smiling while you're fading. After that school play, I told myself it was a phase. Teenagers pull away. That's what everyone says, but with Madeline, it felt different. Like she wasn't just growing up, she was outgrowing me. I stopped getting phone calls. No more updates about schoolboys or the latest books she was reading. The messages I sent were either ignored or replied to with a dry K or LLOL. I'd spent years nurturing that little girl, holding her hand through nightmares, driving her to spelling bees, sewing her Halloween costumes. I remembered the way she used to beg me for one more story at bedtime. But now if I spoke more than a few sentences in a conversation, she looked at her phone. I remember one Saturday, I offered to take her shopping. She needed a dress for a senior banquet, and I had saved up for something special. I picked her up excited to surprise her. I even put on lipstick. A soft rose color she once said made me look classy. We pulled into the mall and she barely looked up from her phone. I said, "There's a nice new boutique I found. The woman who owns it was one of my students, actually." She cut me off. "Grandma, no offense, but can we not do the back in your day stuff? I just want to go where my friends shop." I laughed nervously, trying to hide the sting. "Of course, Sweetie led the way." In the store, she picked out a black sequin dress that I thought was a bit much, but I kept that to myself. I stood back as she posed in the mirror taking selfies. Then I noticed her post one with the caption, "Shopping with the Elderlies." I saw it pop up on my phone from the account I still followed, even though she barely acknowledged me online anymore. I didn't say anything. I just quietly paid for the dress. Later that day, I dropped her off and she barely said thank you before slamming the car door. The next week, I stopped by their house with a pan of lasagna, the kind Olivia used to beg for in college. I baked it from scratch, layering it with love and seasoning, like I always did. Olivia answered the door in workout leggings, clearly not expecting me. "Oh," she said, glancing at the dish. "I thought you said you were going to call first." "I just thought I'd surprise you too," I said, holding it out with both hands. "This one's Madeline's favorite, remember?" Olivia took the dish but didn't invite me in. "She's out with friends," she said. "And honestly, Mom, she's kind of on this health kick. No carbs right now." I stood there for a second, feeling ridiculous, like I'd shown up to a party that had ended without telling me. "Oh well, you can freeze it," I said softly. She nodded. "Sure." Then the door closed. A week later, I got a text from her. "Thanks for the food. Next time, just let me know first. Not, 'Thank you for thinking of us,' or 'Madeline said it was delicious.' Just an instruction for how to be more convenient." That's what I had become, a scheduling conflict, an obligation, a presence they tolerated instead of welcomed. The worst part, I kept trying. I sent money when Madeline mentioned needing shoes for prom. I mailed her handwritten notes, reminding her I loved her. I left voicemails singing her favorite lullabies from when she was little. Nothing came back. I was giving and giving and giving into a void. And it wasn't just what they said, it was what they didn't say. The thank yous that never came. The invitations that never arrived. The way I started finding out about Madeline's milestones through social media instead of from her. Once she was in the local paper for winning a science award. I had no idea until someone at church showed me. That day I sat in the church parking lot in my car, staring at her photo on the page. And I remember thinking I used to know everything about her, and now I know nothing. I wasn't just being left behind. I was being forgotten. The day of Madeline's graduation party felt like a celebration I'd been waiting my whole life for. Even with all the signs, the fading phone calls, the awkward silences, the short replies, I still showed up with my heart wide open. Hope is a hard habit to break, especially when it's wrapped in memories of baby giggles and bedtime songs. I arrived early carrying the cake I had stayed up until midnight, baking 3 layers lemon sponge, Madeline's favorite. I even hand-piped tiny lilac flowers along the top, the same shade as her graduation stole. My back ached from the hours standing in the kitchen, but I was proud. It wasn't just dessert. It was a gesture, a memory, a final gift before she stepped into the next chapter of her life. The backyard was beautifully decorated, twinkle lights, purple and silver streamers, a custom banner that read, "Congratulations, Madeline." There were speakers playing pop music I didn't recognize, and folding tables packed with catered food. Teenagers in ripped jeans and crop tops mingled beside adults in business casual. It felt more like a Pinterest party than a family gathering. I waved to Olivia, who was busy refilling the drinks table. She offered a quick smile and mouthed, "Thank you," before darting off to speak with someone I didn't recognize. I found a small patch of shade, set the cake down gently on the dessert table, and adjusted the foil so the frosting wouldn't smear. I watched Madeline from across the yard, surrounded by a crowd of friends. She looked radiant, confident, the kind of girl who was used to being the center of every room. She hadn't seen me yet, so I walked closer, hoping to surprise her. Maybe hug her. Maybe if the moment was right, give her the small envelope. I had written her a note in a few words, from me to her. Something personal, something loving. I had tucked it into my purse like a secret. As I got closer, I heard laughter, high-pitched, giddy, the kind that makes you feel either 10 years younger or 10 years older, depending on who's laughing. Madeline was mid-story, waving her hands around, animated. I stood just behind the group, waiting for her to see me. That's when she said it clear as day. "Oh my God, she's too old to be here. That's my grandma." Her voice wasn't angry. It was amused, like I was a joke, like my presence was something to laugh about. Her friends burst into giggles. One girl gasped and whispered something, and another one laughed so hard she snorted. Madeline didn't correct them. She didn't say it was just a joke or that I was the one who raised her when her mom was still finishing college. She just smiled like it was true, like it was funny, like I was nothing. My body went still. It felt like someone had taken a needle and pricked my heart. Not deeply enough to kill, but just enough to let something essential slowly leak out. And in that moment, something inside me curled inward. I smiled, not out of joy, but out of training. It's what women do. When the room laughs and we're the target, we smile. When the people we've loved reduce us to a punchline, we pretend it doesn't hurt. I stepped back slowly. No one noticed. I walked over to the dessert table, removed the foil from the cake, placed the serving knife beside it, and made sure it looked just right. I stood there for a moment, wondering if she'd come over, wondering if Olivia would pull her aside and whisper, "That wasn't okay." But no one came. I picked up my purse, my envelope still sealed inside, and quietly made my way to the side gate. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. But as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I realized something chilling. They weren't just laughing at me. They were laughing without me, and that hurt more. I drove home in silence. The only sound was the click of the blinker and the thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. And somewhere between that backyard and my front porch, a line was crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Not by cake, not by cards, not even by love. I didn't storm out of that party. There was no scene, no shattered plate or tearful speech. No one even noticed I was leaving. And maybe that's what broke me most. I walked to my car with steady hands clutching my purse like it was the only part of me that still held shape. The same purse Madeline had once decorated with stick-on rhinestones when she was 6. Somewhere in the front pocket, nestled inside a small envelope, was the note I had written her that morning. It said, "Madeline, I am so proud of you. I've loved you every single day of your life, and I always will. Love, Grandma." But she didn't read it because I never gave it to her. I sat in the car for a long time before turning the key. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. I just sat there staring out at the house, watching silhouettes of teenagers through the windows, hearing bursts of laughter, music humming through the summer air. Somewhere in that house, a cake was being sliced, the one I made by hand. A piece of me was still in there, but no one missed it. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, like grief. Not for a person, but for a place I thought I held in someone's life. A place I had nurtured, protected, poured into like a garden I believed would bloom forever. But you don't realize you've been pushed out until you're standing outside the walls. I drove home slowly. Every red light felt like a moment to rethink, to question whether I was overreacting, being sensitive, too emotional. Those were the words women like me get hit with when we name our pain. So I kept my lips sealed, even in the silence of my own car. By the time I walked into my quiet house, the lights blinking softly from timers I'd set years ago, the numbness had wrapped itself around me like a shawl. I kicked off my shoes, changed into my nightgown, and sat down at the edge of my bed. I thought about calling Olivia just to talk, just to say, "That really hurt." But I didn't want to hear her say, "Oh, Mom, she didn't mean it." Or worse, "Don't take everything so seriously." 'Cause I'd taken everything seriously, my whole life. I sat there for a long time, hands in my lap, feet bare against the hardwood, and then like a switch flipped in my brain, I remembered something. The fund, the college savings account I had opened when Madeline was still learning to walk. Every holiday, every tax refund, every side tutoring gig I had saved for her, quietly, faithfully, without ever asking for anything in return. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, pulled out the small accordion folder where I kept my financial files, slipped out the login sheet I hadn't touched in nearly 6 months. My handwriting was still neat and careful. I'd labeled it Madeline's College Future. I opened my laptop and logged in 72-481-23. That number looked at me like a stranger. I hovered the cursor over the Withdraw Funds tab, but I didn't click it, not yet. Instead, I stared at the screen and whispered out loud, "Am I still doing this for her, or just holding on to what we used to be?" I closed the laptop and sat back in the chair, and that's when it hit me. The moment of clarity, painful but clean. I didn't belong to them anymore. Not the way I thought I did, not in the way that made love feel safe. And they weren't going to force me out. I had walked away that night. I didn't cry. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't draft long messages or rehearse speeches. I simply stood up from the emotional table where I had fed everyone but myself and walked away. Not with rage, not with drama, but with a quiet, broken kind of peace. I wasn't ready for what came next, but I was finally done waiting to be seen. Rock bottom isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a quiet Tuesday morning, a bowl of oatmeal going cold on the kitchen counter, a phone that doesn't ring, a mailbox full of ads, but no letters, a calendar where every day is blank. 2 weeks passed since the party I hadn't spoken to. Olivia Madeline never reached out. No thank you for the cake, no apology for the comment, nothing, just silence. I told myself I needed the space that I was choosing peace. But peace, I discovered, can be indistinguishable from loneliness when you haven't heard a familiar voice in days. The walls of my house started to echo differently. I used to fill them with humming TV reruns, phone calls, the sound of stirring sauces, or slicing vegetables. Now they felt hollow. I was existing inside a shell of a life I once loved. One night, I made dinner for one. Just a simple soup. I set the table like I always did, poured water into both glasses like muscle memory. Then I sat down and realized I had set a place for Madeline. Just out of habit, I stared at her empty chair for almost an hour. The spoon in my hand never moved. The next day, I dropped by the community center where I used to volunteer every other Friday. I hadn't been in a few months. Life got busy. Knees started aching more. And lately, I'd felt unwelcome even there. I walked into the rec room and saw a group of newer volunteers laughing around the coffee cart. I smiled and waved, but no one recognized me. The director glanced up from her clipboard and said, "Oh, hi, were you here for yoga?" "That's down the hall." I said nothing, just smiled, that same tired smile I'd worn at Madeline's party. I turned around and walked out. On the drive home, the radio played a song Madeline and I used to sing in the car. I turned it off. I didn't want the memories. They hurt more than silence. When I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared out the window. I thought of calling my sister Catherine, but we hadn't been close since her husband passed, and I didn't have the energy to explain why I suddenly felt like a ghost in my own family. That night, I looked through an old photo album, the thick leather one, with Madeline's name, embossed in gold on the cover. Every page told a story of a life I gave her. Her first tooth, her school concerts, her 11th birthday, when she wanted a mermaid theme and I hand-sewed little tails for all her dolls. In every photo, I was there right beside her. I closed the book and held it tight to my chest. Then I cried, not a loud, dramatic cry, just a slow, aching leak from the corners of my eyes as I rocked slightly in the dark. My breath stayed shallow, my lips never opened. It wasn't a cry for comfort. It was a cry that had no witness, no audience, and no purpose but release. I felt ashamed for hoping they would notice I'd gone quiet, that they'd text, call show up, say, "We miss you. We're sorry." But no one did. That was rock bottom. Not the betrayal, not the comment, not the cake left untouched. It was the realization that no one was coming, and for someone who had spent her entire life being there, that realization broke something fundamental. For once, I had no one to pour into and nothing left to pour from. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind that soaks the garden and makes everything smell like memory. I was reorganizing the small cabinet in the corner of my bedroom, the one I hadn't touched in years. It was filled with old utility bills, clipped coupons. I never used greeting cards from holidays. Long past, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I think I just wanted to feel useful. When your phone's silent and your house is still organizing becomes a kind of therapy. Each paper a reminder that you once had purpose. That's when I found it. A thick, faded envelope labeled in my handwriting, Madeline College Fund Records. I sat down on the edge of my bed and slowly opened it. Inside were prints from the bank. Every deposit I'd made into her $509 college account since she was a toddler. Meticulous logs, handwritten notes. A spreadsheet I'd made years ago, back when I was still teaching part-time and couldn't afford much, but made it work anyway. There were years when I contributed only $50 others, when I managed to tuck away 1,000 Christmas bonuses, tax refunds, birthday checks from relatives that I rerouted straight into that account. They're all documented 17 years of sacrifice. 17 years of believing that if I gave enough, loved hard enough, helped quietly enough, I would always be appreciated, respected, remembered. Tears welled in my eyes, but I kept flipping through the pages. At the very back of the envelope was something else, a folded acceptance letter addressed to me. It was from the Midwest Writers Fellowship Program, dated 1989. I had forgotten about it. A lifetime ago, before Olivia was born, I had applied on a whim. I was in my late 20s, fresh off a creative writing course at the local community college. One of the professors encouraged me to submit a short story I did, and they accepted me. The fellowship covered room and board for 6 months, a cabin in the mountains, time to write, time to breathe. I never went. Olivia came early. Then there were hospital bills. Then Thomas left. Then there was work. Always work. I stared at the yellowing paper, the official letterhead now wrinkled and soft around the edges. I had been chosen, once seen. Wanted not for what I could do for someone else, but for what I could do for me. I laid the letter on the bed beside the college fund records and stared at them both side by side. $72,000. That's what I had given up piece by piece to make sure Madeline could chase her dreams, even as I buried my own. And what had she given in return? A smirk, a laugh, a joke at my expense. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, still holding the papers. I brewed a cup of tea, sat at the table, and opened my laptop. I logged into the fund. The balance blinked at me again, just as it had the night of the party. $72,481.23. Not a single contribution had come from Olivia. Not a cent from Madeline. Every dollar had come from me through sacrifice, through love, through the quiet belief that I would always have a place in their world. I stared at that number and thought, what if I use this not to help someone else fly, but to finally lift myself? The thought terrified me, but it also thrilled me. I clicked through the settings, explored the options, saw what was allowed: rollovers, withdrawals, reassignments. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel old. I felt awake. I didn't take the money out that day. Not yet. But the seed was planted. That letter, that forgotten dream. The weight of those fund records, they lit something inside me. Something that had been buried beneath casseroles and carpool duty and birthday checks and polite smiles. I wasn't just a grandmother. I wasn't just support. I was a person, a woman, a writer, a dreamer. And I was not done. Something shifted after I found that letter. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic lightning bolt, no defiant makeover montage. Just a quiet moment where I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, she's still in there. Not grandma, not mom, not the one who bakes or babysits or pays me Eleanor. The girl who once scribbled poems in the margins of science books. The young woman who daydreamed about telling stories that made people feel seen. The version of me I'd let fade over time, beneath diapers, jobs, bills, and everyone else's needs. For the first time in years, I lit a candle just for the scent. Not because someone was coming over, I put on a cardigan I hadn't worn in a decade. Plum with little velvet buttons. It still fit. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "Hi," as if greeting an old friend I hadn't seen in ages. Then I opened my laptop, created a new document, and started to write. At first it was clumsy. My fingers hesitated. The words felt thick, awkward, foreign. But I kept going paragraph by paragraph. I didn't try to be perfect. I just tried to be honest. I wrote about motherhood, grief, aging, joy, betrayal, I wrote about standing in the middle of a party and realizing no one saw you anymore. I wrote about choosing yourself after being overlooked for decades. And I cried as I typed, not from sadness, but from a kind of release I didn't know I needed. The next morning I signed up for a free online writing course. They offered one for mature students. I checked the box proudly. Every evening after that I wrote for 30 minutes. No distractions, no checking in with Olivia, or texting to ask if Madeline needed anything. Just me, a cup of tea, and a blinking cursor on a white page. It felt like building a bridge, not back to who I was, but forward to who I might still become. I pulled out my old journal, the one I kept when Olivia was a baby. Inside were letters I'd written to her, stories of our days, notes about her first laugh, first steps, her favorite bedtime. In the back, I found a page I had written to myself sometime around 1985. It said, "Don't forget you were someone before this, and you still are." I stared at those words for a long time, and then I smiled. The next day, I did something even bolder. I emailed the Midwest Writers Fellowship, the same one from that old acceptance letter. I didn't know if the program still existed, but I figured what's the harm in asking? They replied the next morning. The program was still active. They had a new senior track. All I had to do was submit a short story. So I did. I chose the one about Madeline, about the party, about the moment I realized I didn't need to earn love by shrinking. I changed names, of course, but I left the emotions raw, unfiltered. Submitting it felt like breathing again after holding my breath for years. Then, quietly, with no announcement, no fanfare, I logged back into the college fund account. I didn't withdraw the money yet, but I renamed the account. It used to be labeled Madeline's College Savings. Now it said, Eleanor's Second Chance. I stared at those 3 words for a long time, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel heavy. I felt light, like maybe I still had time. Not to be who I was before, but to become someone I'd like to know again. After I renamed the college fund to Eleanor's Second Chance, something in me locked into place. A quiet resolve, not revenge, not bitterness, just clarity. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Was not Olivia, not Madeline, not my sister, Catherine. I didn't even hint at it in my journal. Some things feel too sacred to say out loud while they're still becoming real. Instead, I moved in silence. First, I called the bank and asked about penalties, rollovers, and tax implications. I spoke to a kind woman named Julie who said, "You're well within your rights, ma'am. You're the account holder. You can reallocate however you see fit." I thanked her, hung up. Then I opened a new personal savings account under my name. I labeled it Freedom. I moved the college fund into it in slow, careful portions. No big transactions, nothing flashy, just quiet motion. Every day, a little more of my life shifted back into my hands. Next, I made a spreadsheet. I hadn't made one in years. I listed writing retreats, classes, train trips I'd always dreamed of taking. Nothing extravagant, just things that reminded me I was still a person who had dreams, a woman with a future. I even pulled out my old passport and renewed it just in case. I started waking up earlier, not for chores or errands. For me, I wrote first thing in the morning with a cup of strong coffee and the sound of birds outside my window. There was something sacred about that silence, a kind of peace I hadn't known since before motherhood swallowed me whole. I bought a pair of wireless earbuds, the kind Madeline once teased me for not knowing how to use, and started listening to podcasts about storytelling, memoir, creativity, and later life. I walked around my neighborhood with a slight bounce in my step, soaking up words like water after a drought, And I didn't tell a soul, because this wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about making anyone regret how they treated me. This was about reclaiming myself, without permission, without applause. There's something beautiful about being underestimated. People stop watching. They stop listening. They assume you've given up. That's when you can do your best work. Olivia texted me once to ask if I could pick up Madeline from her part-time job. I replied politely, "Sorry, I have plans today." No explanation, no over-apology, just a boundary. She never responded. I didn't chase her for one. I kept writing. I submitted 3 essays to local contests. One got published online. I used a pen name. But when I saw my words on that screen, I cried anyway. Not because of recognition, but because I was doing it quietly, powerfully, unstoppably. I visited the local library and asked the clerk if they had any open slots for guest readings. She said they had one left for seniors' night next month. I signed up. I didn't know if anyone would come, but I was going to show up. Not for them, for me. At night, I'd sit in bed and read the printout of the story. I submitted to the writing fellowship. I edited a few lines, marked them with a red pen, not because they were bad, but because I was becoming better. The kind of better that doesn't need to be seen, just felt. Olivia never asked about the fund again. I think she assumed it was still sitting there waiting for Madeline's tuition bill. They were too busy or too confident to check, and I didn't offer. I let them believe what they wanted to believe, because in their world, I was still the woman who gave without asking, who showed up without question. But they didn't see the woman who had begun to rebuild herself from scratch, brick by brick, word by word, dollar by dollar. The woman who wasn't waiting to be invited back into their lives. The woman who had finally stepped into her own. Next, it started with a text message. Just 2 words from Olivia. "Hey, urgent. I saw it pop up while I was outlining a new essay idea. Something about generational silence and inherited duty. I let it sit for a while. 5 minutes. Then that alone was a shift. Old me would have dropped everything to respond. New me finished her paragraph first. When I finally opened the message thread, I saw the next one. Need the login for Madeline's college account. Payments due. That was it? No, hi, no, how are you? Not even a question mark. I stared at the screen, then typed slowly. The fund has been closed. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. What, since when? What are you talking about? I didn't reply right away. I stood up, poured myself a glass of lemon water, and walked out onto the porch. The hydrangeas I'd planted last spring were blooming soft blues, gentle whites. They swayed in the wind like they had secrets of their own. When I came back in, I typed, I moved the funds. It was my account, my choice. The reply came almost instantly. You told me that was for Madeline. And there it was. That small, sharp sting coated in entitlement and unspoken expectation. Thank you. For all the years you saved. Not, we should have talked about this. Just accusation, just ownership. I let the phone sit on the table and walked away. I didn't owe her an explanation. Not after 17 years of deposits that were met with diminishing gratitude. Not after being laughed at in a backyard filled with borrowed smiles and cheap music. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked my email. A new message had come in from the fellowship program. My story had been accepted. Not only that I had been offered a full scholarship for their Senior Voices residency, 2 weeks a cabin in the mountains, all expenses covered, time to write, time to be. I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen, but it wasn't a sad laugh. It was a full one, deep alive, That night I posted a short excerpt of my story, anonymously on a writing forum I watched as strangers commented. This gave me chills, and I felt every word. One woman messaged me privately and said, "You made me feel seen. Thank you." And that did something no apology ever could. Later that week, Olivia called. I didn't answer. She tried again the next day, then texted, "Can we talk about this? You're being really unfair." I smiled at that word, unfair. That's how they saw it. Me reclaiming my own money, my own time, my own life was unfair. But what had been fair about the way I'd been forgotten? I didn't reply. And that silence, that was the power shift. Madeline posted something cryptic on her social media. A few days later, a picture of her college acceptance letter with the caption, "Guess dreams don't matter when you're inconvenient." There were sympathy comments, friends saying, "What happened?" And some people are just selfish. I read them without flinching, because I knew the truth. I hadn't done this to punish her. I'd done it to free me. And whether they ever saw that or not, I wasn't responsible for their version of the story anymore. I was writing my own. The silence between us grew. But this time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like air, room to breathe, space to grow. Because while they scrambled to figure out what had changed, what shifted beneath them, who pulled the rug, they never once thought to ask how it had felt. To be dismissed, ignored, humiliated, and still show up anyway. They never thought it might be me, the woman they once called too old, to be here who had taken control. They didn't see the power moving, but it was mine. It was a Wednesday when they finally came to my door. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just an overcast, midweek afternoon, where I had planned to clean out the hallway closet and make lentil soup. I saw the car pull into the driveway and felt it in my stomach before I even stood up. That particular tense flutter you only get when someone you love has hurt you, but you're still unsure whether they've come to apologize or demand something else. It was Olivia driving. Madeline sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, sunglasses on, as if shielding herself from the reality of being there. She didn't even glance toward the house. I didn't rush to greet them. I didn't smooth my hair or rehearse any words. I simply opened the door when they knocked and said calmly, "Hi." Olivia's smile was tight brittle. Madeline didn't look at me at all. "We need to talk." Olivia said I stepped aside and gestured to the living room. I watched them enter a space I had once designed for them. Framed photos on the walls, a candle burning the cinnamon scent Madeline loved as a child. Now it all felt like props from a play no one believed in anymore. They sat. I didn't. Olivia cleared her throat. "You moved the college money?" "I did. You said you didn't tell us. I didn't need to." Silence. Madeline finally looked up her face, unreadable. "That money was for me." I nodded. "It was until it wasn't." Olivia leaned forward, her voice sharpening. "Mom, this isn't like you. You've always said education was the best gift you saved for years. You told Madeline this was her foundation." "I did. I agreed. And then one day I realized something. I had built a foundation for someone who didn't even care if I was standing on it." Madeline rolled her eyes. "So this is about what I said at the party? Seriously?" I looked her straight in the face. "No, Madeline. This isn't about what you said. It's about what you didn't say for months, for years." Her mouth opened, then closed again. I continued. "It's about how I became a ghost in my own family. How you stopped seeing me as a person and started treating me like a wallet, a servant, an embarrassment I gave and gave. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything else." Olivia's voice softened, barely. "You should have said something." "I did in every text, every birthday card, every home-cooked meal, every silent moment where I hoped you'd notice I was hurting." She looked down. Madeline scoffed quietly. "So now what? You just take it all back and pretend like I didn't deserve it." "No," I said gently. "You didn't deserve it. Not the way you treated me. Love isn't a reward for cruelty. Respect isn't optional." She blinked at me, stunned. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a printed copy of my short story. The one that had been accepted into the fellowship, I handed it to them without ceremony. "This got published. I leave for the residency next month." Olivia looked at the first page, then back at me. "You wrote this?" "I did." Madeline looked confused. "Wait, you're like a writer now." I gave a small smile. "No, Madeline, I've always been a writer. You just stopped seeing me as anything but too old." They sat there in silence, unsure how to respond. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush in to comfort them. I didn't explain, I didn't soften the truth. Because it wasn't theirs to soften, it was mine to stand in. I folded my hands. "You're both welcome in my life, but from now on, it will be on my terms. Not out of obligation, not out of habit, and not out of guilt." Olivia nodded slowly. "Okay, I hear you." Madeline looked away, jaw tight. She wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be, and I'd made peace with that. They left soon after. No hugs, no grand resolution, just a door quietly closing behind them, and me still standing, not smaller, not broken, but whole. A few weeks after the confrontation, I received the official email. "Congratulations, Eleanor. You've been selected as the Senior Voices residency winner." I stared at the screen, rereading those words over and over. They felt surreal, like someone had handed me a life I forgot I was allowed to live. The fellowship came with a $25,000 stipend, a 2-week writing retreat in the mountains, and an opportunity to have my work professionally edited and published in a national collection. I sat there frozen, one hand covering my mouth, tears building in my eyes. But these were not the same tears I cried alone in the kitchen weeks before. These were not about grief or loss or humiliation. These were the kind that whispered, "You did this for you." It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the validation. The knowing that something I created, something born, not from obligation but from honesty, was worthy. Seen chosen. That afternoon, I printed the acceptance letter and pinned it to the fridge, right where Madeline's drawings used to hang. It felt poetic. 2 days later, Olivia called. She had seen the announcement. A local news outlet ran a small feature about the fellowship, titled, "At 64 Retired Teacher's Story on Generational Silence Earns National Honor." They had even used a headshot I submitted. It was the first photo I'd taken of myself in years, where I wasn't trying to hide behind a grandchild or a cake or a Thanksgiving centerpiece. Just me standing in the light. Olivia's voice on the phone was tight. "Why didn't you tell us?" I paused, then said calmly, "I didn't think you'd be interested." She hesitated. That story was it about us. I didn't answer directly. It was about a woman who gave everything and finally remembered to give something back to herself. She was quiet for a while. People are asking questions. Madeline's friends saw it. Some of them are sharing it on their stories. I raised an eyebrow. "And she's embarrassed." I took a breath. "You know what's funny? I've been embarrassed for years, sitting at dinner tables where no one asked me how I was standing, in parties where I was the punchline. But I stayed silent. Now the silence is over." Olivia tried to pivot. This is all happening so fast." "No," I said softly. "It's not. It's been happening for decades. You just didn't see it, or didn't want to." A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. It was from Madeline, handwritten short. "Grandma, I didn't know how much I hurt you. I didn't think I was stupid and selfish, and I'm sorry I don't expect anything. I just wanted to say that I read your story. I cried, I miss you, I really do. There was no ask, no request for the money back, no plea for college help, just regret. And somehow that was more powerful than any check I ever wrote." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the front cover of the notebook where I'd written my first story draft. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that truth has weight, and when you carry it long enough, it eventually shifts everything around you. The following week, my editor reached out. They wanted to feature my piece in a special print edition with my real name, with a photo and a byline. I stood in front of my mirror again that night in the same plum cardigan I'd rediscovered weeks earlier and looked at myself differently. I wasn't just a grandmother. I wasn't just someone's backup plan or bank account. I was a writer. I was a woman who had been erased and redrawn her own outline. And the world, the one that had once passed me by, was finally paying attention. The letter from Madeline stayed tucked inside my writing notebook for a week before I touched it again. I didn't call. I didn't text. Instead, I let it breathe. The way you let a wound breathe when it's been hidden under a bandage too long. It needed air, honesty, time. I reread her words every few days, trying to hear not just what she said, but how she said it. There was no manipulation. No, "I need money." Or, "What about the college fund?" Just a simple truth. "I miss you." It didn't erase what had happened, but it softened something inside me. Then one evening I heard a soft knock at my door. Not the urgent kind, not the guilty, angry kind. Just hopeful. I opened it and there she was. No sunglasses, no crossed arms. Just Madeline in a hoodie, and jeans with her hands stuffed in her pockets, like a little girl again. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. We stood there for a beat too long. 2 generations of silence and love and hurt, and years balancing in the space between us. I was in the neighborhood. She mumbled, "Well, I wasn't. I wanted to see you." I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. She walked into the living room like it was a museum, careful, unsure where to stand, what to touch. She looked at the photo frames on the mantel, then at the printout of my story, on the bookshelf. I read it twice. She said, eyes still scanning the room. Once fast, once slow. It made me feel awful, but also like I understood you in a way I never really did. I sat down and gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated and sank into the old armchair across from me. The one where she used to curl up with picture books when she was 5. "I didn't realize how much you did for me," she whispered, "like I knew you were always there. But I didn't see you." I stayed quiet. I let her speak. "I was cruel at the party," she admitted. And for a long time before that, I think I was trying to grow up so fast I thought I had to push away everything that made me feel small. And I guess love makes you feel small sometimes because it humbles you. That caught me off guard. Not the apology, but the insight. She wasn't a child anymore. Not fully. She had started the long, messy journey of becoming a person who could own her pain and how she'd caused it in others. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," she said. "I just wanted to tell you that I get it now. You weren't just helping me. You were giving me your life, and I acted like it was owed to me." I nodded slowly. It wasn't the cake, Madeline, or even the college fund. It was that I disappeared and no one noticed. Tears welled up in her eyes. I noticed after it was too late. I got up, walked to my notebook and pulled out her letter. I handed it to her. I kept it. I said, because it was the first thing in a long time that felt real. She took it in her hands like it weighed something. Maybe because it did. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just letting the honesty hang there between us. Then she asked, could we start small? Maybe I come over on Sundays. No talk about college or money or anything. Just cocoa and stories. That made me smile. Stories I can do. I said she smiled too. I'd like to know who you were before me. I'd like that too, I said. And that was it. No hugs, no grand reunion. Just a soft reopening of a door that had slammed shut months ago. She left a little while later. The air in the house felt different after she was gone lighter. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I hadn't needed her to fix it for me. I had already done that part. Now, if she wanted to be part of my life, she was welcome. But I would never again shrink myself to fit in someone else's story. I live alone now, but not lonely. That's something people get wrong about women like me. Women who spent decades pouring into others. They think our lives are defined by who we gave to who we served, who we raised. And when those people leave or pull away, they assume we crumble. But the truth is, I didn't vanish when they stopped seeing me. I started to appear. It began with a cabin in the mountains. The writer's residency was everything I didn't know I needed. A fire crackling in the evenings, the scent of pine, the slow, generous rhythm of days, filled with nothing but space to create. I was surrounded by strangers who weren't strangers at all. Other women many older than me, who had also set their lives aside for husbands, children, or work, and were now trying to find their way back to themselves. We shared stories over coffee. We read drafts by candlelight. We laughed about how no one ever told us. Starting over could feel like falling in love with yourself. One night I stood out on the deck of the cabin, wrapped in a soft blanket looking up at a sky filled with more stars than I'd seen in years. I thought of Madeline, of Olivia, of the life I had lived so long for them that I forgot I had one of my own. And I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt free. When I came home, I printed my story and framed it. I placed it on the wall near my writing desk. Not to boast, but to remind myself what's possible when you stop waiting for someone to choose you. I still talk to Madeline now. Sometimes on Sundays, like she asked, she brings tea, and we read books or go through old photo albums. She listens in a way she never did before. And sometimes she doesn't talk much at all. But she shows up. And at this stage, in life, showing up is the only apology I need. Olivia checks in from time to time. She hasn't asked about the money again. I think she finally understood that this wasn't about finances. It was about identity, about respect, about being more than what others wanted from me. I haven't rebuilt every relationship in my life, and I don't plan to, because I finally realized that healing doesn't mean bringing everyone back. Sometimes it means bringing yourself home. These days, I spend my mornings writing by the window, with a cup of spiced coffee. I teach a local memoir class once a week at the library, where I listen to other women tell their truths for the first time. I've seen tears fall onto notebook paper as if the pages themselves were baptizing them into a new beginning. Sometimes people ask, "Do you wish you had done all this sooner?" And I used to say yes. But now I know. I did it when I was ready, when I could do it for me. Not for validation, not for permission, not even for love. just for the simple, beautiful truth that my story was mine to live and mine to tell. So I don't regret the years I gave. I don't even regret the silence, because without all of it, I wouldn't be here now on my porch on a breezy spring morning, watching the trees sway, while I type the final words of my second short story collection. Not Grandma's story, not Mom's story, mine. The residency program had a tradition. On the first night after dinner, but before the fire died down in the common room, hearth each writer would share something about their journey to this moment. When my turn came, I stood legs shaking slightly and held up the envelope that had contained my acceptance letter from 1989. I was supposed to be here 33 years ago. I said, watching the faces around the circle soften in understanding, but life had other plans. I raised a daughter alone after my husband died. I helped raise my granddaughter. I taught other people's children for 37 years. I poured everything I had into making sure everyone else could fly. I paused, feeling the weight of those decades in my throat. And then, one day, at my granddaughter's graduation party, she introduced me to her friends as too old to be here. And something inside me finally broke free. A woman across the circle, silver-haired with kind eyes, nodded slowly. The moment when invisible becomes unbearable. She murmured others around the room, hummed agreement. So here I am. I continued, not where I planned to be at 29, but exactly where I need to be at 64. I smiled, then a genuine smile that felt like coming home to myself. Better late than never. That night set the tone for everything that followed. The safety of shared understanding, the relief of being among people who didn't need extensive explanations of what it meant to disappear within your own life. They already knew. The cabin they assigned me was small but perfect. A single room with a writing desk, positioned beneath a window that faced east, catching the morning light. A twin bed with a patchwork quilt, a small kitchenette, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. I immediately promised myself I would use. The floors were worn pine that creaked comfortingly when I walked, as if the building itself were speaking back to me. I unpacked, slowly arranging my clothes in the simple dresser, setting up my laptop on the desk, placing the few books I'd brought on the small shelf above it. When everything was in its place, I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. Through the open window came the sound of a stream somewhere nearby. For the first time in decades, no one needed anything from me. No meals to prepare, no conversations to navigate, no emotions to manage but my own. The freedom was dizzying. That first night I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety or discomfort, but from a strange buzzing excitement I hadn't felt since I was young. I finally gave up trying. Around 3 a.m., wrapped myself in the soft throw blanket from the foot of the bed and sat in the rocking chair by the window. The mountains were silhouettes against a star-filled sky, massive shadows that seemed to breathe in the darkness. I watched them until dawn began to paint their edges with gold, thinking about time, how it slips by while we're looking elsewhere, how it pools in unexpected moments, how it's never really too late to become who you might have been. When the sun finally crested the horizon, spilling light across my small cabin floor, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not the project I had proposed for the fellowship. Not the story about Madeline and the party and the college fund that had earned me this opportunity. Something else entirely, a piece about my mother, who had died when I was in my 30s, who had never seen me become a writer, who had always said I had a gift with words, but had never pushed me to use it. The words flowed without effort. as if they'd been waiting decades to be released, I wrote, until my fingers cramped, until my stomach growled with hunger, until the light shifted to indicate midday had come and gone. When I finally stopped, I had 17 pages and a profound sense of having touched something essential. The structure of the residency was both informal and nurturing. Mornings were entirely our own time to write, walk, think, sleep. Lunches were communal but casual, served in the main lodge, where writers drifted in and out sometimes, sitting together sometimes, eating alone with books or notebooks. Afternoons offered optional workshops or one-on-one sessions with the program mentors. Evenings brought readings, discussions, or simple gatherings around the fire pit under the stars. I fell into this rhythm, easily surprising myself with how quickly the need to check my phone faded, how little I thought about what might be happening back home. Instead, I found myself immersed in the present, the quality of light through leaves, the taste of coffee brewed in a French press, the sensation of ideas connecting in unexpected ways. In my second week there, I had a breakthrough. With my writing, I'd been struggling with a scene about Thomas's death, trying to capture the numbness that followed those first chaotic days of arrangements and decisions. Nothing felt right. Every attempt seemed either melodramatic or clinical, missing the truth of grief's strange terrain. Then one afternoon, walking along the stream that ran behind the cabins, I spotted a fallen tree. It had clearly been down for years, moss covering its length, small plants growing from its decomposing trunk. But what struck me was how the water had carved a path around it, flowing seamlessly where there had once been an obstacle. I sat on a rock nearby and watched the stream for nearly an hour, mesmerized by the way it adapted without effort, simply finding the path of least resistance and continuing on. That evening, I rewrote the scene from this perspective. Grief not as a wall to be overcome, but as a fallen tree that reshaped the landscape permanently, around which life eventually found new channels to flow. When I read the revised scene aloud in our workshop the next day, the room fell silent when I finished. Then Judith, our mentor, a formidable writer in her 70s with publication credits that made us all slightly in awe, leaned forward in her chair. That, she said simply, is what we're all trying to do here. Find the truth that resonates beyond clever language or dramatic events. You found it? I felt something shift inside me, a solid recognition of my own capacity that no external validation, not even the fellowship itself, had quite accomplished. I was a writer. Not because someone said so, but because I had finally learned to see and speak the truth as I understood it. As the residency neared its end, there was a subtle but palpable shift in the atmosphere. Email addresses were exchanged, promises made to stay in touch, tentative plans formed to meet at conferences or readings. We were preparing to return to our regular lives, but none of us would go back quite the same. On our last night, we gathered for a final dinner in the main lodge. The staff had outdone themselves, a feast of local specialties, wine flowing freely, candles glowing on every table. After dessert, the program director rose to make a toast. "To finding your voices," he said, raising his glass. "May they grow stronger with every passing year, and may you never again silence them for convenience or comfort." We all drank to that eyes meeting across the table in shared understanding. Later, as we moved to the fire pit for our final gathering, Judith pulled me aside. "I've been watching you these 2 weeks," she said, her voice low and certain. "You came here thinking this was a last chance at something you missed, but that's not what's happening at all." She smiled, the firelight catching in her eyes. "This isn't an ending or even a delayed beginning. It's just your time now. When I returned home, my house felt different. Smaller, perhaps, or simply more contained than the expansiveness I'd experienced in the mountains. But it was still mine, still the space I'd created for myself. After decades of making room for others, I walked through. Each room slowly touching familiar objects, reacquainting myself with the life I'd built. On the kitchen counter was a small vase of fresh flowers and a note from Madeline. Welcome home Sunday at 2. Just that. No demands, no expectations. I smiled and sent her a quick text. Looking forward to it. The $25,000 stipend from the fellowship had been deposited while I was away. Combined with what remained of the college fund, it gave me enough financial breathing room to focus on writing for at least a year, maybe longer. If I was careful, I spent my first morning back reorganizing my small home office, clearing space, making it truly a writer's room. I hung a map on the wall with pins marking places I wanted to visit, stories I wanted to research. I bought a better desk chair and a new lamp. Small changes, but significant, declaring to myself that this wasn't a hobby or a phase. But my work now, the local paper's article about my fellowship, had sparked interest. My email inbox contained invitations to speak at the community college, the senior center, and surprisingly, the high school creative writing class. Madeline's literature teacher had apparently read my published story and thought it would be valuable for students to hear from someone who had found success later in life. That prospect terrified me more than any other aspect of my new public identity. Standing before teenagers, Madeline's peers, and making myself vulnerable seemed like inviting judgment all over again. But the old Eleanor would have declined out of fear. The new Eleanor said yes. Sunday arrived clear and cool. Autumn just beginning to touch the leaves with gold. I baked scones in the morning, a simple pleasure I now had time to indulge. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Madeline knocked on my door holding a ceramic mug wrapped in tissue paper. I made it in my art elective, she explained, handing it to me. It's lopsided, but it holds coffee. I unwrapped it carefully. The mug was indeed slightly asymmetrical, glazed in deep blue, with Storyteller painted across one side, in uneven white letters. I ran my finger over the raised text, touched beyond words by this acknowledgement of who I was becoming. It's perfect, I said, and meant it. We settled into our new ritual with surprising ease. She told me about her first weeks at the local community college, where she'd enrolled after losing the funds for her first choice school. There was no bitterness in her voice when she mentioned this, just a matter-of-fact explanation of her new reality. Dad's helping some, she said, referring to Olivia's ex-husband, who had drifted in and out of her life since the divorce when she was 10. And I got a partial scholarship for spring semester if I keep my GPA up this fall. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely proud of her resourcefulness. What classes are you taking? Mostly gen eds, but also Introduction to Psychology. Her eyes lit up. I think I might want to go into counseling eventually, helping people understand themselves better. I smiled at the irony how her own journey through our conflict had perhaps pointed her toward this path, but didn't mention it. That was the beauty of our fragile new connection. We could acknowledge the change without constantly referencing what had caused it. When she asked me about the residency, I told her stories about the other writers, the mountains, the breakthrough by the stream. She listened with real attention, asking questions that showed she was actually hearing me, not just waiting for her turn to speak. "Would you read me something you wrote there?" she asked as afternoon light slanted through my windows. Something that isn't about me. I hesitated only briefly before retrieving my laptop and opening the piece about my mother. It's still rough, I warned. That's okay, she said, curling her legs beneath her on the couch. I want to hear your voice, I read slowly, feeling the words in my mouth, watching her face as she listened. When I finished, her eyes were damp. I never knew great-grandma, she said softly. You never talk about her. It hurt for a long time, I admitted. And then I just got out of the habit of remembering out loud. Will you tell me more about her sometime? Madeline asked, and about you when you were young. I'd like that, I said, and realized it was true. The sharing of stories goes both ways. Sometimes we need to be heard, and sometimes we need to listen to ourselves, speak the truth of our lives, to understand it fully. When she left that evening, our goodbye was still careful, but warmer than before. No dramatic declarations of love or forgiveness, just the gentle acknowledgement that we were finding our way back to each other, step by step, story by story. Olivia was proving more complicated. She had called once after I returned from the residency, her tone a mixture of pride in my accomplishment and lingering resentment about the college fund. Our conversation remained surface level. Her work at the dental office, the roof repair she was saving for oblique references to Madeline's adjustment to community college. She seems better, Olivia finally said toward the end of the call. Visiting you. It's good for her. It's good for me too, I replied, refusing to take sole responsibility for the healing taking place. Mom, she began, then stopped. I waited, giving her the space to find her words. I know I wasn't always grateful enough for everything you did for us. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something, a crack in the wall of entitlement that had gradually formed between us. We all did the best we could. I said, neither absolving nor accusing, and now we're learning to do better. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing thinking about generational patterns, how my mother had given everything to me, how I had given everything to Olivia, how she in turn had expected the same from me for Madeline. Each of us repeating what we knew. None of us questioning whether complete self-sacrifice was actually good for anyone involved. But now the pattern was broken. Not cleanly or completely, but significantly. Madeline would grow into adulthood with a different model. A grandmother who loved her dearly but also valued herself. Who could say no without guilt. Who had dreams beyond family caregiving. Whether she fully understood it yet or not, this might be the most valuable inheritance I could leave her permission to behold. The high school presentation terrified me, right up until the moment I began speaking. Standing before 30 teenagers in various states of attention, some leaning forward eagerly, others slumped in practiced disinterest. Most somewhere in between. I felt every one of my 64 years. I had prepared carefully, choosing excerpts that I thought might resonate, practicing delivery, anticipating questions. But when the teacher introduced me, and 30 pairs of eyes turned in my direction, all preparation fled. Instead, I simply told the truth. When I was your age, I began, no one told me I could be a writer. It wasn't presented as a real option for a girl from a working-class family. So I became a teacher instead, which I loved. But there was always this quiet voice inside me that wanted to tell stories. A few students shifted in their seats, perhaps recognizing something in this admission. I continued describing how life had carried me away from that dream marriage, motherhood, widowhood, the daily demands of survival. Until last spring, I said, when something happened that forced me to confront how invisible I had become even to the people I loved most. I didn't mention Madeline by name or describe the party in detail. These were her classmates, after all. But I spoke honestly about the moment of recognition that I had allowed myself to become a supporting character in my own life. Sometimes, I told them, the most radical act is simply remembering who you are beneath all the roles you play for other people. By the time I read a short excerpt from my published story, even the most disengaged students were watching me. When I opened the floor for questions, hands shot up all around the room. Some questions were what I expected about the writing process, about getting published, about the fellowship. But one girl near the back with brilliant blue hair and multiple earrings asked something that struck deeper. "Weren't you scared?" she asked. "To change everything so late, to disappoint people who counted on you always being the same." I considered her question carefully, sensing the personal weight behind it. Yes, I admitted, I was terrified. I still am sometimes. But I've discovered that fear and courage aren't opposites. They're companions. The brave choice isn't the one that feels safe. It's the one that honors what you know is true, even when your knees are shaking. She nodded slowly, something in her expression shifting. I had the sense that whatever struggle she was facing, whatever expectation she was considering defying my words, had somehow given her permission to trust herself. After the bell rang and students filed out, several lingered to speak with me individually. The blue-haired girl was last hanging back until everyone else had gone. "My parents want me to study business," she said without preamble. "But I want to write poetry. They say it's impractical." I smiled at her. This fierce young woman so clearly struggling against the current of others' expectations. Poetry is impractical. I agreed. So are sunsets and music and falling in love. But they're what make life worth living. She grinned, then a flash of relief in her eyes. That's what I'm going to tell them. Thank you. As I drove home, I thought about that exchange, how easy it had been to give her permission to pursue her passion. How hard it had been to give myself the same permission. But maybe that's how change happens. We recognize in others what we need to nurture in ourselves. We speak truths out loud until we finally believe them. The months after my return from the residency passed in a new rhythm I wrote, in the mornings when my mind was clearest. Afternoons were for practical matters, household chores, errands, exercise, evenings. I often spent reading or attending local literary events I'd never made time for before. I joined a writers' group that met weekly at the library. 6 of us ranging in age from 26 to 82. We critiqued each other's work with honesty and kindness, celebrating small victories, commiserating over rejections. Through them, I connected to the larger literary community in ways I hadn't known were possible. Madeline continued coming on Sundays, or sometimes we talked about serious things. Her struggles adjusting to college, my progress with my memoir, the lingering awkwardness between us that flared occasionally when certain topics arose. Other times we simply enjoyed each other's company, watching old movies, attempting new recipes, working on separate projects, in comfortable silence. She was changing, growing. I could see her making conscious efforts to be more considerate, more present. When she asked questions about my life now, they were genuine, not performative. When she spoke about her classes or friends, she didn't check her phone mid-sentence or brush off my responses. One Sunday in late November, as we sat drinking hot chocolate after a walk in the first snow of the season, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever give me another chance?" Financially, I set my mug down, carefully studying her face. There was no entitlement in her expression, No manipulation, just honest curiosity. That's not where my focus is right now, I said gently. I'm using those resources to build the life I postponed for many years. She nodded, accepting this without argument. I get it. I really do. She hesitated, then continued. I'm actually glad in a weird way. Watching you do this has made me think about what I really want, not just what's expected, and working for my degree makes me value it more. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. You're going to be fine, Madeline. You're resourceful and intelligent, and you're learning something more valuable than anything money could provide. How to see people, she said softly. Really see them. Exactly. Later that evening after she'd gone, I thought about her question. The truth was, I might someday help her again, financially, if a specific need arose and I was in a position to assist. But it would be a conscious choice, not an assumed obligation. A gift freely given, not a duty fulfilled. And critically, it would not come at the expense of my own security or dreams. This new boundary wasn't punishment. It was health for both of us. The holidays approached with their usual complicated emotions, now layered with the changed dynamics in our family. Thanksgiving had always been at my house, but this year I didn't automatically offer to host. Instead, I waited to see what would evolve. A week before the holiday, Olivia called, "About Thanksgiving." She began awkwardly. "I was thinking I could cook this year if you'd like to come." "I'd like that," I said, recognizing the olive branch she was extending. "It won't be as good as yours," she warned. "But I'll try. I'm sure it will be wonderful." I assured her. "Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself," she said, then added almost as an afterthought. "And maybe that cranberry relish you always make, the one with oranges." I smiled at the small acknowledgement of tradition of history. Of course, Thanksgiving dinner at Olivia's small apartment was both strange and familiar. The food was different. She had attempted new recipes rather than trying to recreate my standards, but the feeling of family remained. Madeline set the table with mismatched dishes and ran commentary on her mother's cooking. With affectionate teasing, Olivia moved between kitchen and dining area with the frazzled energy of someone unaccustomed to hosting. I sat in the unfamiliar position of guest rather than orchestrator, accepting a glass of wine, offering help only when asked, complimenting each dish as it arrived. It was freeing, this release from responsibility, this permission to simply enjoy the moment. After dinner, as Madeline cleared plates, Olivia poured us each another glass of wine and sat beside me on the couch. "I read your story," she said quietly. "The one that won the fellowship." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I didn't realize," she said, her voice catching slightly, "how much we'd come to take you for granted. How much I'd taught Madeline to do the same without even meaning to. It happens gradually," I said almost imperceptibly. "Still," she looked down at her wine glass. "I should have seen it, should have stopped it." I considered her words the implicit apology within them. We were all doing what we knew how to do. I said finally, "Now we know better." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm proud of you, Mum, for the writing, for standing up for yourself, even if it was hard for us at first." "Thank you," I said, simply accepting both the compliment and the acknowledgement. Later, as I was preparing to leave, Olivia handed me a small wrapped package. "It's not much," she said. "Just something I thought you might like." I opened it carefully. Inside was a beautiful fountain pen, sleek and substantial in my hand. "For your writing," She explained, "Every author should have a good pen." The gesture touched me deeply. Not just the gift itself, but the recognition of my identity as a writer, as someone with creative purpose beyond my family roles. "It's perfect," I said, hugging her briefly. "Thank you." As I drove home that night, I thought about the subtle shifts taking place. Not dramatic reconciliations or Hollywood-style epiphanies, but small movements toward genuine seeing, toward more balanced relationships. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still occasions when old patterns reasserted themselves, still wounds that needed gentle handling. But it was progress. Real, sustainable progress built on truth, rather than performance, on recognition rather than obligation. December brought new developments in my writing life. The editor I'd worked with during the residency contacted me about including 2 of my essays in an anthology she was compiling. A literary journal accepted a short piece I had submitted about Thomas, and the early days after his death, the community college asked if I would consider teaching a creative writing workshop in the spring semester. Each opportunity felt like confirmation that I was on the right path, that the risk I'd taken in claiming my creative life had been worth it. But the most meaningful validation came from unexpected sources. One afternoon, checking my mail, I found a letter from a woman in Idaho who had read my published story online. "I've never written to an author before," she began, "but your words described exactly what I've been feeling for years. That slow disappearance, that gradual erosion of self reading your story, gave me courage to make changes in my own life." She went on to describe how she had finally enrolled in nursing school at 58, fulfilling a dream she had abandoned decades earlier to raise her family. "If you could reclaim your voice," she wrote, "I realized I could reclaim mine too." I read her letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision. This connection across distance, this recognition between strangers, this quiet ripple effect of honesty. This was why I wrote. Not for acclaim or validation, but for the profound human exchange that happens when one person's truth recognizes another's. I wrote back to her that same day, thanking her for her courage, for taking the time to reach out, for reminding me that stories matter, not because they're clever or beautiful, but because they're true. As Christmas approached, I decided to do something I'd always wanted but never prioritized. I booked a 4-day retreat at a small bed and breakfast on the coast. Just for me, not to work. Not to write necessarily, just to be. When I told Madeline my plans during our Sunday visit, her eyes widened. "You're not going to be here for Christmas." "Not this year," I said gently but firmly. "I've always wanted to see the ocean in winter." She looked momentarily thrown, then caught herself. "That sounds really nice, actually. Will you take pictures?" "Lots," I promised, "and we can celebrate when I get back." That evening I called Olivia to share my plans as well. There was a brief pause after I explained. "So you'll miss Christmas dinner?" she asked, and I could hear echoes of the child who had always counted on me to make holidays magical. "Yes," I said simply. "I've booked the reservation already, but I'd love to do something special when I return." Another pause, longer this time. Then with audible effort, "Okay, well, have a wonderful time. You deserve it. Progress," I thought as we said goodbye. Small, imperfect progress. The coastal retreat was everything I had hoped for. The bed and breakfast was charming, a Victorian house perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Each room uniquely decorated. Breakfast served family style each morning. The other guests were mostly couples, with one other solo traveler, a retired history professor who became my occasional walking companion. I spent hours on the beach bundled against the December wind, watching waves crash against rocky outcroppings. I collected shells, took photographs, wrote snippets of description in a small notebook I kept in my coat pocket. In the evenings, I read novels by the fireplace in my room, luxuriating in uninterrupted fictional worlds. On Christmas morning, I woke before dawn and wrapped myself in the quilt from my bed. I carried a thermos of coffee down to the beach and sat on a piece of driftwood, watching darkness give way to light. As sunrise painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I thought about the many Christmas mornings I had spent in service to others' joy, cooking elaborate breakfasts, orchestrating gift exchanges, making sure everyone felt special and celebrated. Those had been good moments, meaningful in their way. But this quiet solitude, this communion with natural beauty, this gift I had given myself, this was also good, different but equally valuable. I took a photograph of the sunrise and sent it to Olivia and Madeline with a simple text: "Merry Christmas from the edge of the continent. Love you both." Their responses came within minutes of each other. From Olivia, a photo of their small tree with presents underneath, and the message, "Miss you, but happy you're getting your ocean view." From Madeline, a selfie of her in pajamas hair, messy, grinning over a mug of cocoa. "Merry Christmas. Grandma, bring me a cool rock from the beach." I smiled at their messages, tucked my phone back in my pocket, and continued watching the sunrise. Connected but independent, loved but free. It's been a year now since that graduation party, since the moment when invisibility became unbearable, since I reclaimed the funds and the future I had set aside for so long. In that year, I've published 7 essays and completed a draft of my memoir. I've taught 2 writing workshops and spoken at numerous community events. I've made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and built a life that feels authentically mine. My relationship with Madeline has evolved into something I never expected: a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than simply familial obligation. She still comes on Sundays, but now she brings her poetry to share, asks real questions about my experiences, listens with genuine interest to my responses. Last month, she won a writing contest at her college with a poem about generational patterns and breaking free. When I asked if she'd written it about us, she smiled. About all of us. She said, about seeing and being seen. Olivia and I have reached a different kind of peace. We may never be as close as I once hoped, but there's a new honesty between us, a willingness to acknowledge both connection and separation, to love without merging, to support without sacrificing. The college fund money is nearly gone now, spent on writing conferences, professional development, travel research for my next book, and simple quality of life improvements I denied myself for decades. I don't regret a penny. Recently, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. The topic they assigned me was reinvention in later life. I prepared carefully, softening a speech about resilience, about the courage to change course, about the false narrative that our most productive years end at some arbitrary point. But when I stood at the podium looking out at the faces of women ranging from 20 to 80, I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke from the heart instead. I used to think my story was about starting over. I told them about finding a second chance after decades of putting others first. But that's not quite right. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been. I paused, feeling the weight of this truth. We talk about reinvention as if we need to transform into something different, something better. But what if the real work isn't changing who we are, but removing the layers of compromise and expectation and fear that have hidden our true selves? What if we're not becoming, but uncovering? As I spoke, I saw women nodding, some wiping away tears, others sitting straighter in their chairs. I told them about the party, about the comment that broke something open, about the quiet morning when I redirected the funds from Madeline's future to my own present. But mostly I told them about the freedom that comes from finally choosing yourself. After a lifetime of being chosen last, afterward, women lined up to speak with me to share their own stories of disappearance and re-emerging one after another. They described versions of the same journey, the gradual erosion of identity within family roles, the moment of reckoning, the tentative steps toward reclamation. I thought I was the only one. A woman in her 70s told me, her voice breaking, I thought I was selfish for wanting more before it's too late. You're not selfish, I assured her, taking her trembling hand in mine. You're awake. That evening driving home from the conference, I thought about that grandmother at Madeline's party. The one who stood frozen with the cake, who smiled to hide her pain, who walked away without anyone noticing. I thought about how far she had come, how much she had learned, how completely she had transformed her understanding of love and worth and purpose. She wasn't gone, that woman. She was still part of me. Her pain still real, her journey still unfolding. But she wasn't alone anymore in carrying the weight of invisibility. She had found her voice, and through it connected to a chorus of others who understood exactly what it meant to disappear while still standing in plain sight. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my porch swing watching darkness fall over my small garden. The spring bulbs I'd planted months ago were just beginning to push green shoots through the soil, not visible yet in their full beauty, but undeniably present, undeniably alive, undeniably reaching toward light. I sipped my tea and smiled, recognizing myself in those emerging plants, not rushing, not forcing, simply growing. At exactly the pace I was meant to grow, in exactly the direction I was meant to go. My time, my terms, my truth. At 64, finally fully seen. By others, yes, but most importantly, by myself. Sources. One afternoon, checking my mail, I found a letter from a woman in Idaho who had read my published story online. I've never written to an author before. She began, but your words described exactly what I've been feeling for years. That slow disappearance, that gradual erosion of self reading your story, gave me courage to make changes in my own life. She went on to describe how she had finally enrolled in nursing school at 58, fulfilling a dream she had abandoned decades earlier to raise her family. If you could reclaim your voice, she wrote, I realized I could reclaim mine too. I read her letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision. This connection across distance, this recognition between strangers, this quiet ripple effect of honesty. This was why I wrote. Not for acclaim or validation, but for the profound human exchange that happens when one person's truth recognizes another's. I wrote back to her that same day, thanking her for her courage, for taking the time to reach out, for reminding me that stories matter, not because they're clever or beautiful, but because they're true. As Christmas approached, I decided to do something I'd always wanted but never prioritized. I booked a 4-day retreat at a small bed and breakfast on the coast. Just for me, not to work. Not to write necessarily, just to be. When I told Madeline my plans during our Sunday visit, her eyes widened. You're not going to be here for Christmas. Not this year. I said gently but firmly. I've always wanted to see the ocean in winter. She looked momentarily thrown, then caught herself. That sounds really nice, actually. Will you take pictures? Lots, I promised. And we can celebrate when I get back. That evening I called Olivia to share my plans as well. There was a brief pause after I explained. "So you'll miss Christmas dinner?" she asked, and I could hear echoes of the child who had always counted on me to make holidays magical. "Yes," I said simply. "I've booked the reservation already, but I'd love to do something special when I return." Another pause longer this time. Then with audible effort, "Okay, well, have a wonderful time. You deserve it. Progress," I thought as we said goodbye. Small, imperfect progress. The coastal retreat was everything I had hoped for. The bed and breakfast was charming, a Victorian house perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Each room uniquely decorated. Breakfast served family style each morning. The other guests were mostly couples with one other solo traveler, a retired history professor who became my occasional walking companion. I spent hours on the beach bundled against the December wind, watching waves crash against rocky outcroppings. I collected shells, took photographs, wrote snippets of description in a small notebook I kept in my coat pocket. In the evenings, I read novels by the fireplace in my room, luxuriating in uninterrupted fictional worlds. On Christmas morning, I woke before dawn and wrapped myself in the quilt from my bed. I carried a thermos of coffee down to the beach and sat on a piece of driftwood, watching darkness give way to light. As sunrise painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I thought about the many Christmas mornings I had spent in service to others' joy, cooking elaborate breakfasts, orchestrating gift exchanges, making sure everyone felt special and celebrated. Those had been good moments, meaningful in their way. But this quiet solitude, this communion with natural beauty, this gift I had given myself, this was also good, different but equally valuable. I took a photograph of the sunrise and sent it to Olivia and Madeline with a simple text. "Merry Christmas from the edge of the continent. Love you both." Their responses came within minutes of each other. From Olivia, a photo of their small tree with presents underneath, and the message, "Miss you, but happy you're getting your ocean view." From Madeline, a selfie of her in pajamas hair, messy, grinning over a mug of cocoa. "Merry Christmas. Grandma, bring me a cool rock from the beach." I smiled at their messages, tucked my phone back in my pocket, and continued watching the sunrise. Connected but independent, loved but free. It's been a year now since that graduation party, since the moment when invisibility became unbearable, since I reclaimed the funds and the future I had set aside for so long. In that year, I've published 7 essays and completed a draft of my memoir. I've taught 2 writing workshops and spoken at numerous community events. I've made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and built a life that feels authentically mine. My relationship with Madeline has evolved into something I never expected, a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than simply familial obligation. She still comes on Sundays, but now she brings her poetry to share, asks real questions about my experiences, listens with genuine interest to my responses. Last month, she won a writing contest at her college with a poem about generational patterns and breaking free. When I asked if she'd written it about us, she smiled. About all of us. She said, about seeing and being seen. Olivia and I have reached a different kind of peace. We may never be as close as I once hoped, but there's a new honesty between us, a willingness to acknowledge both connection and separation, to love without merging, to support without sacrificing. The college fund money is nearly gone now, spent on writing conferences, professional development travel research for my next book, and simple quality of life improvements I denied myself for decades. I don't regret a penny. Recently, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. The topic they assigned me was reinvention in later life. I prepared carefully, softening a speech about resilience, about the courage to change course, about the false narrative that our most productive years end at some arbitrary point. But when I stood at the podium looking out at the faces of women ranging from 20 to 80, I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke from the heart instead. I used to think my story was about starting over. I told them about finding a second chance after decades of putting others first. But that's not quite right. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been. I paused, feeling the weight of this truth. We talk about reinvention as if we need to transform into something different, something better. But what if the real work isn't changing who we are, but removing the layers of compromise and expectation and fear that have hidden our true selves? What if we're not becoming, but uncovering? As I spoke, I saw women nodding, some wiping away tears, others sitting straighter in their chairs. I told them about the party, about the comment that broke something open, about the quiet morning when I redirected the funds from Madeline's future to my own present. But mostly I told them about the freedom that comes from finally choosing yourself. After a lifetime of being chosen last, afterward, women lined up to speak with me to share their own stories of disappearance and re-emerging one after another. They described versions of the same journey, the gradual erosion of identity within family roles, the moment of reckoning, the tentative steps toward reclamation. I thought I was the only one. A woman in her 70s told me, her voice breaking, I thought I was selfish for wanting more before it's too late. You're not selfish, I assured her, taking her trembling hand in mine. You're awake. That evening driving home from the conference, I thought about that grandmother at Madeline's party. The one who stood frozen with the cake, who smiled to hide her pain, who walked away without anyone noticing. I thought about how far she had come, how much she had learned, how completely she had transformed her understanding of love and worth and purpose. She wasn't gone, that woman. She was still part of me. Her pain still real, her journey still unfolding. But she wasn't alone anymore in carrying the weight of invisibility. She had found her voice, and through it connected to a chorus of others who understood exactly what it meant to disappear while still standing in plain sight. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my porch swing watching darkness fall over my small garden. The spring bulbs I'd planted months ago were just beginning to push green shoots through the soil, not visible yet in their full beauty, but undeniably present, undeniably alive, undeniably reaching toward light. I sipped my tea and smiled, recognizing myself in those emerging plants, not rushing, not forcing, simply growing. At exactly the pace I was meant to grow, in exactly the direction I was meant to go. My time, my terms, my truth. At 64, finally fully seen. By others, yes, but most importantly, by myself.